Hello and welcome to another episode of Quick and Nerdy. As always, I'm your host, Brandon McCoy, technical advisor here at Veeam Software, supporting our Veeam cloud and service providers. And today, we're back with another one on the Code Cracker channel. Today, we're going to be talking about backing up public cloud workloads, specifically from an MSP perspective. Before we get started, there's two things I'd like to address. One is, you may notice I sound a little hoarse. I'm perfectly fine, no worries. I just got back from VeeamON 2023 in Miami, and I couldn't stop yelling and shouting about how Veeam is the number one software in data protection. Number two, we've changed the PowerPoint theme and Outlook. I like it. It's a minute to grow on me. I'm used to that kind of dark Veeam green, but I like it. It's kind of like this technological abyss of the universe. It looks very futuristic. Just wanted to point that out in case you were wondering. So anyway, today we're going to be talking about backing up public clouds. And the reason I think it's so important is because there's a huge market opportunity for our service providers. We're seeing more and more customers either move to a hyperscaler like Azure, AWS, or they already have some of their infrastructure there. And so what we want to do is we want to see the best way to back these workloads up using Veeam, especially from a service provider's perspective. So let's dive right in. Now, when we say backing up the cloud, we're really talking about Veeam Backup for AWS, Veeam Backup for Azure, and Veeam Backup for Google. Now, the reason Google has an asterisk is because there are some features that don't apply, specifically our Veeam Service Provider Console. So in a moment, we're going to talk about how you can deploy and manage these public cloud workload appliances. And Veeam Backup for Google is excluded from doing it through our Veeam Service Provider Console. Now, by the time you watch this video, that may have changed, but as of now, 6/1/2023, Veeam Backup for Google cannot be deployed through the Service Provider Console, but all the other things will apply. All right, so with that out of the way, so Veeam Backup for AWS, Azure, and Google are appliances in their respective cloud. And there's three ways to manage these appliances, and we're going to talk about each one, the pros and cons, some of the feature sets, and then we'll jump into a demo. We'll keep it real high level as we always do, or as I try to. So the three ways, like I mentioned, the first is standalone. So let me just go ahead and say, don't do this. So especially if you're a service provider, right? Standalone means that you're going to the marketplace, you're spinning up, say, a Veeam Backup for AWS appliance, and you're managing it from AWS, and that's it, end of story. Now, if you're a customer and you just want to back a couple workloads up, this may work for you. As a service provider, this is kind of isolating the product to its own and not having that true integration. So the other two options are much better. The second one is the preferred method. This is integrating the public cloud appliance with a backup and replication server. We're going to talk about the whys in a moment, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay. Now, the third option is another good option for service providers, and it's not my favorite, but it's definitely preferred over standalone, and that is just deploying and managing the appliance through the service provider console. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the three options. So, standalone through the marketplace. So first of all, you can't use your rental keys. That means the service provider team doesn't get paid. That means you can't upgrade your point consumption, maybe to get to a bigger point plan. You can't use Veeam keys. You have to get the keys through the marketplace. But the second and third are even more important. So the second one is, what happens in the cloud stays in the cloud. Everybody knows that. So let's say you've got a Veeam Backup for Azure appliance, and it's standalone. You manage it through Azure. It backs up into Azure. It restores into Azure. That's it. If Azure's down, too bad, right? And all your eggs in the same backup basket. So this is along that same thread of it's in this one cloud. If that cloud goes down, isn't available, or you're hacked, everything is in that Azure basket or that AWS basket or that Google basket. So these are the main reasons why a standalone deployment is just not the preferred method, in my humble opinion. That's why we're going to need a bigger backup server. So managing it through a backup and replication server is going to give you the ability to do backup copy jobs. It's going to give you the ability to restore to different locations. And it's really what I recommend out there. Now, the benefits of integration, there's immutability. So those backups can be made immutable. In other words, they cannot be deleted. They're read-only. You have the mobility, which we're going to show in the next slide, of being able to move those backups around. And then the visibility. And this is really where the service provider console is going to come into play and give you a deeper look and insight into the public cloud workloads and all of the other kinds of Veeam products that you're hopefully using. So on that cloud mobility piece, if you look at here, this is a great slide. I forget who I stole this from, but thank you so much. This really sums it up. You've got protection of multiple clouds from a service provider's perspective. Bring your own rental keys to add to your point consumption. Choose your cloud. You're able to move from one cloud to another. So I'll give you a great example. You can do Veeam Backup for AWS. You can copy it to Wasabi or Backblaze, and you can restore it to Azure. You can back up on-prem and restore to the cloud. You can back up the cloud and restore on-prem. Up, down, left, right, A, B, select, start. So those are just some of the amazing things about Veeam and why you need integration. And the standalone products will do the backups, but you really need those other Veeam tools to get the full suite and to be able to really lift and shift. Last slide, just kind of on that same thread, and I don't want to go too off topic here, but I think this fits in. Just showing the flexibility of Veeam as a whole, and then more specifically with the cloud. So like if you look at the top, vSphere, I can take vSphere and I can restore it to, Hyper-V. And that's, again, a little outside the scope of this conversation, but on that same tier, vSphere to an Azure VM, right? If you go down towards the bottom, I can do a Google VM to a Hyper-V server, right? I can do a Linux physical machine and restore it as an AWS EC2 instance, right? You get the idea. We can pretty much do everything except with Red Hat, which is completely outside the scope of this conversation anyway. So just to give you an idea about that flexibility, mobility, and this only happens if you have a backup and replication server managing your public cloud workloads. Yep. Now, managed through the service provider console, there's some pros and cons here. The pro is that there's no additional Veeam Backup server required. So I know that Veeam Backup and replication has to be installed on a Windows machine. Windows machine licensing can cost money, even though it could be like a Windows 10, but still. So if you don't want to have to deploy another Veeam server, you should already be using the service provider console for your licensing and your multi-tenancy. If you're not, stop this video, go watch that, go reach out to your sales rep, talk to me, let's talk about service provider console. That should be used in all these cases, right? But just the service provider console with no VBR server in the middle, you're going to get true multi-tenancy to see the other products, and you can deploy the appliance through the plugin. So we'll see that in the demo. I can go into our plugin library in the console and deploy an Azure or an AWS appliance. At this time, Google is not supported to be deployed through the console, thus the asterisk from earlier. So I think I've done enough talking. I definitely did a lot of talking and screaming the last couple weeks. So let's hop right into the lab, and we'll take a quick peek at a demo and wrap it up. So here we are in the demo lab. We are inside of Veeam Backup for AWS. Now, Veeam Backup for Azure, Veeam Backup for Google, they both have a very similar interface, but since AWS is the most mature of our cloud products, that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. So this is an appliance that runs inside of AWS. It's just an EC2 instance or a computer, and it's got the appliance application on there. If I click configuration, this is the getting started. And again, I think it's a little outside of the scope of this video for the entire setup, but basically you add your AWS accounts in here that you would like to protect. Using cross IAM roles, you can have multiple accounts under one appliance or maybe one appliance for each client. It's kind of up to you there. Typically, we recommend a production account and a backup account, and then we're going to always store the backups to AWS S3, Infrequent Access, and Glacier. And so that's kind of one of the first things to touch on is, again, using this standalone appliance, everything that happens in AWS stays in AWS. Now there are these workers. These are the data movers. So if you're familiar with Veeam's proxies for on-prem, this is like a proxy in the cloud. It's just the data mover. It does the backup, it does the restores, and we give you these different profile types for the size machine needed to back up certain amounts of data. So once you kind of go through that initial configuration, get your accounts, repositories, and data movers set up, you've got the resources, so we're backing up EC2 instances, RDS, serverless databases, Elastic file shares, AWS file shares. We're also backing up the VPC configuration, all the networking. But let's just take a look real quick at the EC2 instance. So the jobs are always going to be controlled from the appliance regardless of how the integration is set, right? So I'm deciding what kind of role needs to be used for the backup, what I want to back up, anything that I'd like to exclude. Do I want to do application aware backups? And we can do snapshots, we can replicate those snapshots, and once we take those snapshots, Veeam turns them into a backup file. Now those backup files are also stored in your S3 buckets, and then maybe your dailies, your hourlies are stored in standard S3, your monthlies are stored in infrequent, and your yearlies, semi-yearlies are stored in Glacier. So we'll move those backups for you, and we'll give you kind of a cost estimation breakdown. Now once the backup has finished, still from the console, still standalone, under protected data, this is what I can restore. So we'll just choose an EC2 instance in this case. So my AWS EC2 instance, this is a Windows machine. I can restore the EC2 instance, the EBS volume, or I can restore a file back to that machine, or I can download it. And that's going to be using the AWS Kinesis and Shard mechanism. But again, a little outside the scope of this conversation. The big thing to note here is that the backup jobs are created here. The data is stored inside of AWS, and you can restore it to AWS for the start. Now, how did we get here? Well, we actually deployed this appliance from a Veeam Backup and Replication instance. So again, this is my favorite method of protecting public cloud workloads for service providers and actually for customers as well. So first of all, under my backup infrastructure, under managed servers, you got to make sure you're at the latest version of Veeam, and you need to have the public cloud plugin. And you'll know that because when you click Add Server, you should see Veeam Cloud Native Backup Appliance. If you don't, you'll just need to go to our website and download the plugin. So we'll click here and we'll choose the appliance. So as a service provider, you may have one backup and replication server, and you may have some customers with Azure, some with AWS, some with Google even, and you can add multiple appliances in. Now in this case, I've got my Veeam Backup for AWS that we just saw, and if you've already set up the appliance before you stumbled across this video, that's okay. You can connect that appliance to this Veeam server. If you're starting fresh, I would recommend that you have Veeam deploy the appliance for you. So when Veeam deploys the appliance for you, it's going to ask for the account information, the size machine. Typically a T2 medium is fine. It really depends on the number of workloads. We've got some pricing and sizing calculations for that as well. But the main point is I can deploy the appliance from my Veeam server. Okay. I can also see the repositories. So external repositories, if you're ever wondering, are the backup repositories specific to that cloud native workload. So for instance, if I want to add a Veeam Backup for AWS S3 repository, if I want to add a Veeam Backup for Azure Blob repository, that's where I would add these, or again, connect to an existing one if they've already been set up. Now Veeam knows about the appliance for the integration. It also sees the repository. Now again, the jobs are still managed from the console. So if I were to edit this job right here, it would just reroute me back to the appliance and I would control my jobs. But from the Veeam server, now first and foremost, the license. I've got your regular Veeam backup and replication, in this case Enterprise Plus license, and the workloads I've cut are for cloud virtual machines, serverless databases, and cloud file shares. Now with that, I am consuming traditional rental licenses with the public cloud workloads as my workload. In addition to that, I can now do a backup copy job. I can select a backup from the S3 bucket, so in this case my EC2 instance. I can click next. It's just talking about encryption here. And then I can send that to my Cloud Connect repository. I can send it to another cloud, maybe Wasabi, Backblaze for a more inexpensive option, right? And have its own retention policy. I can also make these repositories immutable, so again, keep that in mind. The backups that are in my external repository. So here's an AWS EC2 instance. Now, as I showed you before, from AWS, all I can do is restore back to AWS, which is typically what you're going to want to do. But this gives you the ability to instantly recover to VMware or Hyper-V. In this case, I've got a VMware host attached to my Veeam server, so it's automatically selecting vSphere for me. And I can turn this EC2 instance into a vSphere virtual machine instantly, right? I can also do the same thing for Hyper-V. And as you saw from the compatibility matrix in one of the slides earlier, the mobility is in and out, in between, up and down clouds. I can also restore to Azure. Did a POC not too long ago. We had a customer who had 20 virtual machines in Azure. We used Veeam Backup for Azure to protect those machines. We copied those backups to the Wasabi cloud, and then we restored them into AWS so that they had that cloud mobility, freedom of choice, exit strategy, DR all wrapped up. Lastly, the application items. So we are able to use our Veeam Explorers on these as well. So Active Directory restores, SQL table database rollbacks. So those are the benefits of using a backup and replication server. Now, in the essence of time, and just to keep this short, we're going to wrap this up, and we're going to show the service provider console and what you can do here. Now, first of all, on your service provider console, you do have your Cloud Connect server, and I need to open that up. I apologize. While that's opening, we'll probably go back here real quick. Yeah, let's go back to the service provider console. Okay, and so just while I'm getting that set up, under configuration and under the plugin library, if I go to Veeam Backup for public clouds, I can come in and I can add the accounts that I would like to protect, Azure and AWS. Once I've done that, I can actually deploy the appliance. So once again, the interface here, this is the Cloud Connect server that I'm using to deploy it. And I can deploy a new appliance, or again, if you've already got it set up, I can connect to the existing appliance from there. Now, once I'm done with that, and I've got the repositories and everything is added in, this is that true multi-tenancy we talked about. And also keep in mind that you can have the best of both worlds, which is what I really recommend, is a backup and replication server integrated with your Veeam Backup for public cloud workloads for the additional backups and restore capabilities, plus the visibility of seeing those, say for instance under the backup job column where managed by backup server, and I can see my public cloud workloads. Or if we're just connecting it to the console and there's no Veeam server in the middle, I at least still have some ability to do some light job management and see the backups. And lastly, what I want to talk about is how to license it through the service provider console. So like I mentioned earlier, if you want to consume your rental licensing, then you have to have a Veeam Backup and Replication server integrated with the service provider console. Now, if you're not using the backup and replication server to do copy jobs and having that extra Veeam server with those extra features, and you want to use the service provider console, you're still using a backup and replication server to license it. It's just that you're using the Cloud Connect Veeam Backup and Replication server. So real quick, and we'll wrap up here. Under the plugin library, once I've got my Veeam Backup for public clouds, probably also got my Pulse integration here, I can come in, I can go to my license keys, and I can click New License, and I can select Product. Now you'll notice, or you may have noticed, that they have added public cloud in with Veeam Cloud Connect. So Veeam Cloud Connect licensing, used for all different kinds of various things, they've added public cloud to it, because if you want to consume your rental licensing and you only want to use the service provider console, you don't want to deploy additional Veeam server, then you're going to put this license on your Cloud Connect server. So Veeam Cloud Connect and or public cloud. So let's say your client has 10 Azure or AWS virtual machines. Your client has 10 AWS or Azure file shares and 10 RDS serverless databases or Microsoft Azure SQL. So you would cut a key for here with these types of workloads. So it will be a Cloud Connect key, a .vcsp license that goes on a Cloud Connect server. And that's very important, right? Because you wouldn't want to put a regular Veeam license on a Cloud Connect server because it would break the Cloud Connect functionality. But once I cut this key, I would download it, I would assign it to my internal company. I'm not going to do that, but you get the gist. And then I would just simply go in to my Veeam Cloud Connect backup server, go to license, and I would just drop it right here. So I think that's the big summary right there, is you can do this through standalone, but you can't have rental licensing. You don't get the extra benefits. Having a traditional Veeam backup and replication server allows for backup copies, restore to different locations, granular restore capabilities, plus you get to use your rental key. And then the third option is if you don't want to deploy an additional Veeam server, hopefully you're already using the service provider console, so you don't get the extra copy job and restore functionality, but you can just put a public cloud workload key on your Cloud Connect server and at least be able to see it all from the service provider console. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this video helpful. Make sure you like and subscribe. We'll see you next time right here on Code Cracker with more Quick and Nerdy. Take care.